Hi folks, my name is Thibaut Van Dam and I am a DIY singer-songwriter and guitar tutor based in Southeast London. Today I'm very excited to be back on my channel continuing my series about practical guitar and also music theory, specifically looking at lesson 32 where I'm going to be talking about borrowed chords. Borrowed chords are actually quite complicated. They can also be called modal mixture, and this has to do with the idea that you are essentially borrowing a chord outside of your key and then returning back to the key you were in, which is why they're called borrowed, because you're going to sort of borrow from another key and then bring it into your key. And in that sense, borrowed chords, I'm sure you can start to tell, could be very complicated, because if you are in a major key and you borrow something from, say, a minor key, then you can allude to that more, but you don't have to borrow from major and minor. There's more than just major and minor. For instance, you could borrow from a mode, like the Phrygian mode, or the Dorian mode. And if you did that, there's a flavor that comes with that. And when you essentially add notes to your key, you can play more in that key and sort of blend the two, a little bit like spicing things up. That's why that word is used often, spice, you know, the spicy chord here, because I think it adds flavor to kind of the idea of the tonality, the key that you're in. So I have worked out kind of what the strategy will be for today's video, where I will do a crash course essentially in borrowed chords. I want to explain some differences between secondary dominants and borrowed chords, because that was the subject of the last two videos I made. And actually borrowed chords encompass secondary dominants. So I wanted to point out some differences there. And I also just want to talk about borrowed chords in practical function, like why you would actually choose to use them. And at the end of this video, I plan to basically do a song analysis of a song that uses two borrowed chords, which I think exhibits excellent songwriting. And when you think about the lyrics and the way that specifically the borrowed chords reinforce the lyrics, you end up with just a tremendous song. The song I'll be looking at is American Boy by Estelle, Kanye West, and will.i.am, and a bunch of other songwriters. And this song is 15 years old, but it still has stood the test of time, really. And it still sounds fresh and inviting. I have to point out that borrowed chords are profound in the sense that they can be genre defining, like grunge, and yet they're also ubiquitous. For instance, they appear in other styles of music like blues, psychedelic rock, or grunge, or also even hip hop and R&B and things like that. And I will say that I think that the most popular songs of all genres seem to use borrowed chords. And I think this is just the hypothesis I have. And I think it's owing to the idea that when you are thinking about borrowed chords and where they come from and that specificity, you're actually opening up the possibility of kind of a more thoughtful composition. So you don't really need to know information to do this. All you need to do is be thinking actively, like what are you doing and what is the point of the chord that you choose. You know, if you play a happy chord, like a traditionally happy chord like C major or something, and you say something really sad like my dog died, I don't know, that could be deliberate, but you have to be thinking about why. I think that that's where songwriting comes into play, and I think borrowed chords force more active songwriting. So I think that borrowed chords are profound, and if this sounds interesting to you, please stay tuned. Please consider liking the video and subscribing. Thank you to everyone that does subscribe to the channel. It really does mean a lot. It holds me accountable. I was trying for the last months to make this video, but I was just having a really tough time with other things, but also just like feeling final about this. But seeing people subscribe in the meantime and writing comments and stuff made me feel accountable, made me want to come back and make this video. So thank you to everyone that does subscribe. It really does mean a lot. And let's go ahead and get into it. So I mentioned first and foremost this idea of secondary dominance and what's different about borrowed chords and secondary dominance. There's two main differences, and it's pretty simple. Secondary dominance, like the 5 of 6, two things can be clear about them. The first is that we're using a dominant chord when we use a secondary dominant. And this is owing largely to the two things. One, the 5/1 cadence, the authentic cadence, but also the exact nature of that chord. The dominant chord basically, in general, has a tritone in it. And that's the space between the minor 7th of the root and the major 3rd of the root. And this creates musical tension. Now, when the dominant chord is in the 5 position of a scale, then what's happening is you're actually playing the leading tone. The major 3rd of the 5 chord is your leading tone of that scale. Now this can be used in different ways. It's such a powerful sound, the leading tone concept supplemented by its own tritone, that we would just as happily go up to the tonic. That's the purpose of the leading tone, being the 7th scale degree. Right? And so when you use it in that way, you're using, first off, that secondary dominants have to be dominant chords, and also, secondly, that you usually have a cadence to follow, the equivalent 5-1 cadence, where you resolve to your primary, except instead of it being the primary one, like G7 to C, it might be E7 to A minor, because in the act of resolving the leading tone and its supplementary tritone, you don't need to actually clarify if it's a major or minor chord. So you could use secondary dominants to also key change, essentially. But when you use them as secondary dominants, you resolve back within the key. And that's when you use the cadence. And that's also what's different about secondary dominants to borrowed chords, is that there's a cadence you'll follow. If you play the 5 of 6, you tend to play the 6 after. So anyway, those are some of the differences. And that said, there are still functional differences between secondary dominants in and of themselves. So the 5 of 6 still feels different than the 5 of 5, for example. Right? There's something functionally similar, and yet we resolve in different ways. And so you could actually extend the idea of functional theory to secondary dominants. And in that same way, you can do the same with borrowed chords, which is what I was just saying a moment ago, which is that once you identify which scale or key you're borrowing your chord from, you can start to add in the flavor, that spice. Now, the most traditional borrowed chords come from the minor scale, the parallel minor scale and parallel minor key. This is the blending of majorness and minorness, and it comes from blues. So when we hear a major scale or major key, when we hear that, the blending of the minorness comes from the flat 3, 6, and 7. Right? So when we blend in those flat notes, the flat 3, 6, and 7, we can extrapolate them to being chords. And that's where we get our most popular borrowed chords. So that is sort of what I'll be talking about in a moment. The only other thing that I need to point out is that there is a lot of prerequisites that would help you to know going into this video. I love to explain each of the prerequisites briefly, just for my own peace of mind, in case someone is ambitious like myself and dives in at the deep end, but I don't have time to do that today. So I'll just list out the things that you would need to know to understand today's video, starting with the chromatic scale, which is knowing every note. Equal temperament, that every note has equal function or opportunity. They're more like bricks in a wall than they are like letters in the alphabet, even though they are letters. They are universal in how they function. And this is increasingly more important as later theory is built off of it. For example, intervals, the space between any two notes. That's a perfect fifth, and so is that. And that is possible because of equal temperament. Triads, when you stack notes, you can get major, minor, diminished, augmented chords. You can stack more than 3 notes. You can stack 4 notes. You can get major 7th, dominant, minor 7th, half diminished, and etc. There's suspended chords. There's also major suspended chords. Yeah, like major suspended, my personal favorite. Okay, then there's also the major scale and the minor scale. So the major and minor scales are formulas based off of a root. Because of equal temperament, that can be any note. So that means that you can have a major or minor scale attributed to any note. So to say, there is a C major scale and a C minor scale. Hopefully you already know this stuff, but if you don't, this is stuff you need to know basically. You need to know that there's a relative relationship between these two scales actually, that when you start C major from the note A, you actually end up playing the minor scale, also called the Aeolian mode. I haven't done a video about modes, but I plan to do that shortly, probably the next video or the video after. You need to know that when you harmonize the notes, diatonic thirds within each of these scales, you start to construct the chords that are inherent to your scale, which is also known as your key. So you need to know that because that's so essential to understanding songwriting. And then building off of that, functional theory. So just to add also that there's a formula. Once you identify the harmonized major and minor scales, there's a formula to that. And so knowing that formula is the most profound thing, I think. It's the belly of the beast. Once you actually go through the act of harmonizing the major scale, it's kind of the penultimate theory, because beyond that, a lot of stuff is very interpretive. There is, of course, more detailed theory, but, you know, it's not the most intense stuff. And then, yeah, you need to know about that formula, because that's where we transpose into a more interpretive level, like the major 1, the minor 2, the minor 3, major 4, dominant 5, minor 6, and diminished 7 chords. Functional theory, German functional theory, is basically the general study of how you can use these chords to express songwriting and storytelling, which is where a lot of songwriting and storytelling come from in modern music. This is largely owing to the fact that German functional theory, although a lot of people don't actively think about it today, that actually it's informed our palette in modernity. So like a lot of the music that we've heard over the last, 50, 60 plus years, has been informed by functional theory, German functional theory, in that study. And so even people that may not know German functional theory might have been conditioned to expect the kind of 5/1 authentic cadence and other popular cadences that are resultant of German functional theory. So it's important to kind of confront that head on and know that. There's also the Viennese school of thought on functional theory, which is basically that each scale degree associates with the tonic differently. And then finally, Roman numerals. The Roman numeral system is vital to know today because it is a tally system whereby we can communicate both scale degree and aspects of majorness and minorness in one singular image, symbol, which is capital and lowercase respectively. So capital 1 is major, lowercase 1 is minor. You can have a major 1 and a minor 1. And this is crucial for understanding how to communicate borrowed chords in sort of the Roman numeral system. So great. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and get more into the idea of borrowed chords. If you don't know all those things, then I have made videos about all of them, except, like I said, about modes. So go check out those videos if you need to. And I'm just going to go right ahead and continue. So borrowed chords, like I said, there's lots of borrowed chords. You can borrow any chord. So one borrowed chord you can use is a minor one. So you could be in the key of C major. And that's pretty weird. You can do that though. You can borrow anything you want. It's very liberating. Now, that sounded kind of jarring. So the question is, how can you use borrowed chords in a way that's palatable? And there are, like I said, more popular borrowed chords than others. And so the most popular borrowed chords usually come from the minor scale, the parallel minor scale and the parallel minor key. And specifically in that other key, it's the major 3, the major 6, and the major 7 chords. And when we talk about them, we have to speak about them with respect to the major scale that we were originally in. So that's why they're called the flat major 3, 6, and 7, because respective of the parent signature, say any major scale, but any major key, but like say C major, when we're in C, the parallel minor scale is C minor. Right? And each of those chords, they have different chords in each of those keys. So the most popular chords you could borrow would be the major chords from that minor key. And so what that looks like in the end is you're playing along in C, and then you borrow a chord from the parallel minor scale. Now it can sound kind of complicated. And like I said, I'll do another video where I talk about this in more detail. But ultimately, the way you can identify the most popular borrowed chords is by playing through your scale and then flattening those respective notes, the flat 3, the flat 6, and the flat 7th. 1, 2, 3, flat 3. And then this note, which is the note E flat, becomes the root of your major chord. Now, like I said, I will talk about exactly why. I mean, I can even show you kind of the math associated with this, kind of the technical stuff. I'll probably show the same image in a future video, but basically you have your major scale, your minor scale, and then you're looking for the major chords in your minor scale. Now we're doing parallel, so you'll see that these are both starting with the note A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A here for the minor, and then with the major, C sharp, F sharp, and G sharp. Thereby we get kind of that flat 3, flat 6, and flat 7, which is where we get flat 3, 6, and 7. That's what's different between these two scales, that they are, even though they're parallel, there's differences. C sharp and C natural, and then F sharp and F natural, and G sharp and G natural. So relative to the major scale, the parallel major scale, A major, we have a flat 3, 6, and 7 scale degrees. And it just so happens those notes are the same chords inside this harmonized key that are major, C major, F major, and then G major. So essentially what we're doing is we're going to play through, say, like A major, any of the chords here, again, using this kind of formula on here, major 1, minor 2, minor 3, etc. And this is that harmonized major scale formula. And then what we're going to do is we're essentially going to add in any of these borrowed chords, flat major 3, flat major 6, flat major 7. Again, they're communicated using Roman numerals. So flat and then capital 3, 1, 2, 3, major 3, flat and then major 6, and then flat major 7. And the reason we speak about them with respect in this way is that you could actually solve for the chords if you just know your major scale. So let's say you play A major, and you're going through your scale, da, 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 as you go through it, you're going to end up on the 3rd scale degree, and you flatten that from C sharp to C natural, and you play it as a major chord. And so that's where we get that from. So I'll just sort of demonstrate that quickly with, like, say, C major. So that's C major, this is the beginning of C major, 1, 2, 3, but we're going to make a flat 3rd. And like I said, this is going to be the root of the major chord to make an E flat major chord. And the idea here is we're going to incorporate this chord. This is our first borrowed chord, the flat major 3 chord. We're going to incorporate it into the key of C. So we'll just strum along something really mundane in C major. Let's do 1, 4, 5, and just get a feel for that. This sounds like a million different songs, but it also sounds really predictable. Now let's introduce E flat major, That's like already tremendously more interesting. Now what's curious about borrowed chords is that although they sound like they're out of the key, which they are, they're actually pretty expected in popular music. A lot of music uses borrowed chords, so it doesn't sound super out there, it just sounds kind of out there. Imagine a lot of psychedelic music uses borrowed chords. So if you've ever listened to Pink Floyd, if you've ever listened to anything even at all remotely from the 60s, if you think about the Beatles even, they use tons of borrowed chords. If you think about their music, you've heard borrowed chords already. That's why they don't sound totally wrong and out of place. They just sound different, and they sound like they're out of our key. And so that's a borrowed chord. Now you could actually borrow, say, the minor, flat minor 3 chord. And it's different. It doesn't feel the same. That would be using E flat minor. Again, it's still a borrowed chord. It just doesn't feel the same. That's why it's not considered, why I would say, one of the most popular borrowed chords. So then the other popular borrowed chords would be the flat major 6, flat major 7. So let's stay in C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the note A. We're going to make it an A flat or G sharp. And then all we need to do is play G sharp major. Remember, so the G sharp will be the root of the major chord that we play. Like I said, they're going to be the major chords from the parallel minor key. So those are the most popular borrowed chords. So we're going to go ahead and play C, F, and then G again. But this time we're going to introduce the G sharp major. So 1, 4, flat major 6, 5. It's very specific in flavor, and it sounds kind of common, weirdly, even though it's totally out of our key. So let's do the flat major 7 just to kind of complete this kind of exercise. So again, we're going to go through the major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and we're going to take that note B and we're going to play B flat, which is the 3rd fret on the G string, and we're going to use that as the root of a major chord, B flat major. And this is the flat major 7 chord, and we can use this in the key of C major. So 1, 4, flat major 7, 5. And I just want to stress at this point, so again, it sounds out there, that sounded more psychedelic to me, but again, consider the aesthetic. If you're playing through electric with some effects, you get a different result. Something else I just want to point out is if you were playing through your C major key, if you knew all the chords in C major, and then you have 6, and then the diminished 7. So another way of thinking about this is to say, well, what was the chord you were going to play? So this is the 7, the true 7, in the C major key. We're going to flatten that and play a major chord. But again, you can borrow a chord that's not major. If you say flat major 7, you're going to play a major chord. But you could also say flat minor 7. So you could say this note, which is the 7th scale degree, which is that B, B flat, and then you could do it as a minor chord if you want. Yield a different result still. it's weirder. It feels weird and less common. But yet again, it is a borrowed chord. So you can see why this is so vast and that you can do whatever you want, but that there's kind of the more popular approaches. Flat major 3, flat major 6, flat major 7 when you're in a major key. Okay, great. So hopefully that makes sense. That's kind of like the fast, easy way of figuring out certain borrowed chords. Let's go ahead and turn our attention to the song American Boy by Stell, Kanye West, Will.i.am, all these songwriters. And let's go ahead and do a quick sort of analysis. And what I'll do is I'll go through all the steps of the analysis. I might even do a separate video where I talk about the method of doing a song analysis, and then in a separate video, yeah. But I'll go through it now, and then I'll do an analysis, but then I'll also show you what it would have sounded like if we stayed within our tonality. Like if we didn't do the borrowed stuff, would the song feel the same? And of course the answer is no, but I just want to show you because it's so ridiculous what it sounds like. Okay, so the step 1 of the analysis, learn the song. The song includes the following chords: E major 7, C major 7, A minor, and then D dominant. And then the last time around, we substitute the D dominant for the chord F major 7. So in context, I want you to hear it in context is. It's very important to, when you go through learning the actual song, pay attention to two things. It's kind of step 2. It's an important one. After you learn how the song is played, you want to listen for 2 things. 1, what sounds like home? Where do we keep going back to? That's kind of thing 1. Second thing you want to listen out for is what feels out of place. This is a really important thing to consider because when we look at the theory in a minute, certain things will seem like they make sense, but in practice, they certainly do not. And I'm speaking expressly about this chord, F major 7. When we look at the theory, you'll say that's supposed to fit in, but actually it feels out of place, and we don't want to forget that. So those are the things to consider when you're going through the analysis. So then step 3, I guess, would be to write those chords down. And I've already sort of done that. So you'll see the chords here if you need to copy my work. E major 7, C major 7, A minor, D dominant, and F major 7. Okay, step 4 is to draw up your circle of fifths using the mnemonic phrases we have. Caroline gets drunk and eats butterflies, which taste sharp. And then going back to 11 o'clock and going counterclockwise, saying the word flat, spelling out the word bead, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat. This is my contribution to music. Flat bead. And to remind you that B flat is flat and that E is flat and A is flat is D is flat. Flat bead. Okay, and there's your circle of fifths. I encourage you to always write up your circle of fifths because when you do, you can see every key, you have every key at your disposal, and then you can actually see everything and you can really get a feel for what's going on. And you never know what you might need. That's an important thing to point out too. And actually, the more you do it, the better you get at it, of course. So step, I guess, 5, after you've drawn up your circle of fifths, is to make associations. So you find the major chords in your key and you're going to circle them on the circle of fifths because they express all major keys. Now, the thing to do here is you want to keep in mind that rule of 3, where you can associate 3 major chords next to each other, adjacent, 1, 2, 3, right next to each other, like this, F, C, and G. If you can see that, you've identified a major key, C major, where C is the 1, G is the 5, F is the 4. This is kind of what we're going for. Now let's go ahead and start circling. So we have E, C major, D dominant, and then we have F major as a substitute at the end. If you saw all this, you might think that we were in the key of C because we saw F, but we don't see G, and that's an important thing to point out. We're not in the key of C, but we might be in the key of G, and that's because we saw D dominant, and that's kind of our best guess. That's because D dominant only appears as a dominant chord in one position, the 5 position, right? So this is 1, 5, 4, just like this would be 1, 5, 4 in a given key. So that would imply that we see C major, we see D dominant. That means that we're probably in G because this is satisfying the role of the 5 position as being a dominant chord. Whereas if it was major 7th, it would make sense. So this is dominant 5 and that goes back to the 1. So it implicates G as the 1. Now there's one obvious reason why we're definitely not in the key of G, and I'll show you in a sec. But let's just solve for it anyway, because there's something valuable that we'll uncover. If we solve for the song according to the key of G, we find the following. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G, these are all the chords, and then this is that harmonized major scale formula. Major 1, minor 2, minor 3, major 4, goes like this, the 4th to 5th, minor 6, diminished 7, 1. We apply that. So step 6 is kind of apply those Roman numerals 1, or maybe step 7, after you establish your key, associate. So here we have major 6, which is weird. Then we have major 4, 2, 5. This is normal. This sounds normal. But the cool thing that we uncover is F major 7 is the flat major 7. Like I said, flat major 7 is a more popular borrowed chord. So this actually fulfills the role that we were looking for here. This is one of the borrowed chords. And yet we cannot genuinely say we're in G. Why is that? Because we never see the chord G. We never see G major. We never go to 1. That doesn't actually functionally make any sense, because the whole point of the 1 is that it's home. So is the belief of the song that we never go to 1? Maybe, yeah. But let's establish the idea that there is a feeling of home in some sense. Let's find out where it is. Now, it turns out we are in fact in the key of E minor. Now we're still using 2 borrowed chords. Before I pointed out we had major 6. Instead of it being major 6, and when we solve for E minor, we get the following. Major 1 in a minor key, which is uncommon. So this is still borrowed, just like this was a major 6 in a major key. You usually get minor 6. So this is borrowed, and so is that. This is still borrowed, but instead it's a major 1. Then we have the major 6, minor 4, dominant 7, and flat major 2. This makes a lot more sense, flat major 2, and I'll show you why. Because when you hear the flat major 2, this feels like the 2 being sharpened ever so slightly. And this still feels like home. So we are in E minor. The difference is that we are in E minor, but we never hear E minor. We just keep going back to a borrowed chord, the major 1. This makes sense because we're, of course, in the minor key borrowing from the major, which is something you can do. But why this is so profound has to do with the lyrics, which is what I'll talk about now. Take me on a trip, I'd like to go someday. It's a fantasy. Take me to New York, I'd like to see LA. I really want to come kick it with you, and you'll be my American boy, American boy. Using the borrowed chord as our 1 basically implicates that we are in a fantasy, but what makes the fantasy even richer and deeper is when we borrow yet another chord, the flat major 2, the idea is the emphasis is the American boy is a fantasy within that fantasy. You'll be my American boy. So traveling with somebody is a first fantasy, and the fantasy within that fantasy is being with this person specifically. So that's why the lyrics and the chords reinforce each other really, really well and are very, very effective, I think, and why the song sounds fresh. Also, because it never, ever gives us the 1. So it prohibits us from ever feeling truly satisfied. If, for instance, we did feel satisfied, though, according to tonality and staying within 1 key, I will show you now how terrible it is, how truly nightmarish it is. So first off, this would not be major 7th, this would be the minor 7th. Take me on a trip, I'd like to go someday. Take me to New York, I'd like to see LA. I really want to come kick it with you, and you'll be my American boy, American boy. Yuck. Does that not make you want to just like throw up? It's like the worst. It squashes the fantasy immediately. So if you wanted to write a song about fantasy, I think that this idea of the borrowed chord is very effective. And in this sense, this speaks to the overall function of borrowed chords altogether, the shock factor. When you use a borrowed chord in your music, you surprise the listener and you catch them off guard. You can cut a little deeper. So that's a big function of the borrowed chord altogether. Now, there is, of course, nuanced function going on here, but I don't have time to talk about it today. I feel pretty satisfied about this video. It's taken me a long time to get through to it, so and like get through all the points and make them clear and obvious, I think. Let me know how you found this video, if it was too long or whatever, or ways I can improve. Let me know if it was helpful, of course. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Let me know what you want me to talk about next, and I'll see you at the next video. Ciao for now.